Perfect. So I see, yes, I guess you're talking about the slides. So yeah, okay, so 4 o'clock, let me welcome you officially to our webinar, Mastering Risk and Opportunities. And I'm really happy to have all of you guys here from all over. And we have advertised 2 speakers, Pierre and Kelly. Unfortunately, Kelly is right now on a really important quality topic right now. I think she's on an audit last minute. So Pierre will take over for this, but the presentation is really amazing. So I'm sure you will really love it. So I want to thank Pierre for joining us, to thank our partners for this webinar, Factor Quality and Qualio. And before we start with the presentation itself, a small information about how to use the chat. Please use it freely. So you already started typing. That's really good. But please make sure that when you want to ask questions, that you click on the question mark. That way, we collect the questions and either we can answer them immediately, either Pierre can answer them immediately, or we'll do it at the Q&A session at the end. So please, with questions, please use the question mark. And when you do question mark, we see it like this. So it's also highlighted for us. Please stay until the end of the session because, first of all, we will have a Q&A and a discussion. We will have the opportunity, to dig into what's critical, what's important, and if there are any unanswered questions. And additionally, we will be distributing certificates for the attendees who stay until the end. So stay at least, please, until end of the session, so we can sort the attendees, and people who will stay at least until the end of the session. You don't have to stay for the Q&A, but then from this time frame, you will get the certificates emailed to you automatically within until the end of the week. So we still check it, and then it starts going to all the attendees. And as you know, we are doing, we're trying to make GMP education available for everybody around the world for free. Sometimes we also do it by, by you guys helping us financing the operation with certificates of attendance. But this time, I really want also to thank our partner, Qualio, the main event sponsor for this webinar, and our partner who is also sponsoring this webinar certificates and the webinar itself. So it means that you get this time all the certificates for free. So please give Qualio a round of applause and thank them for this amazing event that you will have. We also have Kelly with us from Qualio, and she will give a really, really short introduction into some information about Qualio, and then she will also introduce Pierre, our main speaker for today. So, sorry, Ashley. I think I said Kelly, I'm not sure. So Ashley from Qualio. So the stage is yours. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Yan. Yes, my name is Ashley Sherrick. I work for Qualio. I'm in the marketing department and run all of our webinars. So thank you everyone for attending this evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are in the world.
Yeah, Ashley, thank you. I think I'm not sure if your camera is still rotating for me. Can you maybe try relaunching it so people can see you? Perfect. Nice, Ashley. Now we can see you really well. And again, thank you very much for making this webinar happen. And yeah, take it from here. I'll put the slide with a bit of information about Qualio.
Sounds great. Thank you. So Qualio is a first cloud quality management software for all life science companies. We know that medical device and pharmaceutical companies need a secure and scalable quality management system with the flexibility to support ever-evolving company needs. Qualio does meet that challenge by cutting through all the complexity to optimize and automate critical quality processes. So we are easy and simple to use, scalable and trusted, since our platform is secure, compliant, and audit tested. So our ready-to-use QMS software unites your teams, processes, and data all in one place so you can get to market quickly and scale successfully. So with that being said, in our little spiel about Qualio, I'm going to now introduce you to our presenter of Factor Quality, presenter Pierre Servan. So Pierre is Factor Quality's founder, principal consultant, owner, and leader. He has more than 20 years in the quality industry. His vision 11 years ago was to help customers fix quality issues, improve their businesses, and help get them certified. Naturally, he developed a knowledge and skills that allowed him to start performing certification audits for the same registrar for over 5 years. After his experiences that he's gained, he moved his career into a global semiconductor company where he was quality systems lead and continued learning more about quality management. Pierre quickly became the North America quality manager for this organization. In 2011, after 7 years as quality manager, he opened up his own quality management business. His objective is to help multiple companies manage their quality activities without overcomplicating their organizations, otherwise known as keeping it simple. Pierre's thirst for knowledge and an equal passion for sharing has helped Factor Quality grow in the industry. He has had the privilege of speaking as an expert in industry trade shows, conferences, symposiums, and ASQ meetings or workshops. He keeps Factor Quality in sync with the quality industry and ensures that our knowledge is current and valuable for our customers' benefit. Today, Factor Quality focuses on continuing to improve and keeping up with our expertise and experience. So now that we have completed Pierre's introductions and a little bit about Qualio, I will pass the mic on to Pierre, who will be presenting today, and we're going to start off with a poll question to get our webinar started.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be here this day with you and sharing a little bit about risk management. But before we get started with the presentation, I thought we'd do a quick poll, just so I have an idea who's represented in the webinar today. So, what industry do you work in? Are you in pharma, medical device, automotive, aerospace, or another industry?
Pierre, can you check your camera, please? Because I think you disappeared.
Oh, yes, I did. Give me one quick second here.
Yeah, while people answer the poll. And I've seen already people asking, actually, is this webinar applicable for pharma or medical devices, or both? So I think that gives the answer.
I'm going to turn off my microphone here for a second. Give me 1 second. Okay, can you see me now?
Yes, I can see you. I see that people are not seeing the slide. Can you refresh the slide? But you can see the poll, right? So please continue answering the poll, and maybe Pierre can also relaunch his slides, and then we can get with it. So I will read for now the results of the poll. So we have 72% of the attendees. They're from pharma, then 15% medical devices. We have nobody from automotive, but we have 12% who are from other. So I guess it's probably food, maybe cosmetics. So let us know in the chat. Do you see the slide now? Okay, so Pierre, also you feel free to continue, but check your camera, please, again.
Yeah, there seems to be an issue with my camera. Give me one quick second here.
Yeah. Okay, we apologize, of course, for the technical issues, but technology. But I think most of the people see the slides. If for some reason you don't see, please just refresh your window or click the refresh button at the top. We'll continue with the presentation in a second. I will end the poll and let you also see the results, so you see it for yourself. Oh, okay. So we have, for example, Sylvia from Poland. She works with cosmetics and medical devices.
Great.
That's really nice. And logistics for life sciences. That is, of course, really also applicable, right?
Are you still able to see that slide, right?
Yeah, correct. All good. So we see you now. Yeah. So I think you can proceed.
Very well. So let's get going. So today, here's the agenda for today's presentation. We'll be looking at doing first definitions and understanding a little bit about what risk-based thinking it's all about. We're also going to be talking a little bit about tips to manage risk properly. And along those tips, we'll discuss also some of the issues or challenges that you might face, or I normally call those pitfalls. So we'll cover some of those as well. We'll be talking some of the tools that might be used. And this is just a set of examples. This is not an exhaustive list of tools that are available, but some tools that are commonly used throughout quality and in other areas as well. And we will be finishing up, as promised, with a Q&A discussion session at the very end. So I intend to go through the presentation without answering questions, and I'll reserve those answers at the very end of the presentation. Very well, let's get started. So the first thing that we want to do is define risk. Now, if you picked up any standard that is out there in terms of definitional risk, you're going to find a very similar definition throughout. So I picked basically what is in Guide 51, and many documents out there, standards out there, do make reference to Guide 51 as the source to define risk. And that's basically the combination of probability and of occurrence of harm and the severity of that harm. Okay, and that basically, in simple terms, what we're looking at is basically what's the probability of something bad happening and how bad can it be? So probability times severity, and that's the basic definition. Regardless of where you look at it in terms of risk definition in different documents, it boils down to many times to this. How likely is it going to happen? So what's the probability? And how bad can it be? How severe can it be? Now, a few years ago in 2015, when ISO 9001 made its release, it introduced risk-based thinking at the time. Notice it's not called risk management, but risk-based thinking. And in their definition of risk, they walked away from the definition I just gave you and added this wording, that risk is the effect of uncertainty. So that's brand new in the risk world. And the reason why they did that is basically because uncertainty can be either have a negative or a positive effect. So now we're not only looking at risk from how bad can it be, but also it can be looking at risk as an opportunity, where we could have a positive outcome. And this is what builds into risk-based thinking thoughts and ideas, or the concept. That's how it was born. So technically speaking, risk-based thinking as a term is brand new. It's roughly 7-8 years old. while risk management has been around for a long period of time. Now, when we're looking at negative and positive, the terms risk and opportunities comes into focus, and that's how this was created. So what is risk-based thinking? Risk-based thinking, in many instances, it's something that it can be almost automatic. It's very natural in our way of doing things, believe it or not. And I'd like to give you the example of when I was a few years ago, in a personal level. I was at a pool with my 3-year-old, and my 3-year-old wanted to go down a water slide. And so she did. She went down a water slide. And on the bottom of the water slide, when she came down, her head went under the water, caught her completely by surprise, so much so that when she came out of the water, she was grasping for air. At that moment, you could see in her eyes that she was somewhat a little bit scared. But what did I do at that moment? In my head, as a dad, I said to myself, I don't want her to remember this experience as a negative experience. I need to get her back to the top of that slide, and she needs to go down the slide again. And so I did. So I encouraged her to go up the slide to enjoy the ride again. And so she did. Now this time, what I did a little bit different was, okay, I took some extra steps forward to be closer to the bottom of the slide, just in case the same event repeated itself. However, this time when she went down the slide, she came down the slide and she didn't go under the water. Her face was bright with a smile. So what I did there was took a risk, or took an opportunity to make sure that my kid would not forget, have a positive experience going down a slide. And that came automatic on my nature. Now in business, I said, well, Pierre, yes, that translates in day to day, and we could see that. How does that translate into the business world? Well, automatic things can happen in the business world, sometimes in the very nature or the very culture of the business, where they decide to maybe stay away from certain type of markets or certain type of activities. It kind of gets ingrained in the system. Now, there are other things, much smaller that we kind of already do as second nature, and that's part of risk-based thinking, where we just do it to basically get the best result possible in our organization. The term risk, in one way or the other, has always been related to quality, right? We do inspections to prevent getting bad product to the customer. That in itself is risk mitigation in up to a certain point. So risk-based thinking was the natural evolution of preventive action that we used to have in the prior ISO 9000 standards. It's still very much so in other ISO standards where we still have that requirement, but it's closely related to this risk-based thinking, where we need to make sure that we are looking at things and taking action before they happen. That's preventive action in itself, right? And one of the biggest struggles that we had in the ISO world when we were doing ISO implementations, it used to be that many companies will get write-ups for not having preventive actions documented, or not having evidence of preventive actions. And usually when I did audits and reviews of that, it boiled down to companies not being able to take credit for the good things that they did, because they were kind of forced to put it down on a format. So by having risk-based thinking, kind of open up this idea of being preventive, and you could do it in multiple ways, as we're going to discuss later on today. It is closely related to process approach, in the sense that as we deploy our quality management system, most of the standards will require you to be looking at risk at the different processes that you have. Not only just product. We need to be looking at risk maybe at a higher level, and looking at processes as well. So it's closely related to process approach. And as a matter of fact, if you look into the section 4.4 in ISO 9001, it will point out to those activities of identifying your key processes and identifying the risks associated with those processes. And I should say risks and opportunities associated with those processes. As I mentioned before, it's certainly preventive in nature. We want to make sure that we have the opportunity to link our quality activities all the way even to the strategic planning of the organization. And by having implementing risk-based thinking, risk management, that's a good way to link our quality activities, our quality thoughts, quality management, all the way up to the strategic direction of the organization. Last but not least, we are supposed, as I mentioned, to be looking at opportunities. So risk is not only negative, but we want to also be looking at what positive outcomes can happen if we take action on a particular issues or topics that might be relevant to the business or the organization. So why use risk-based thinking? There are a few things that will help us understand why risk-based thinking is of importance to you as a business. First of all, it is beneficial, okay? Successful companies do this intuitively. So it does bring benefits to the business. Some of those benefits include customer satisfaction by providing not only having happy customers, but also more so providing a high degree of confidence to your customers that you are aware of what the risks are and that you are taking the right steps, precautions to minimize that risk. And with that saying customers, that includes the end user, or in many instances, a consumer. So that's very, very important in this. Also, it is going to allow us to, as part of being integrated into quality management system, it allows us to maintain or reach a level of consistency of your quality that the business desires, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a high quality product, but if the business that's the aim of the business, and of course most of your businesses have that as a goal, we're going to be able to work towards having that high quality product on a consistent manner. And it also introduces basically proactivity, being the culture, being proactive, being ahead of the issues before they happen. And that's certainly very important in our quality cultures, in our organizations, where we want to be ahead of the problems rather than chasing the problems, or rather than being a firefighting constantly. So when we talk about risk-based thinking in the QMS, there are a few things that we need to make sure or take into account. We want to make sure that we implement it because it's going to help us achieve consistencies in our goods and our services. Okay. Now, one thing that we want to make sure that we keep in mind is, as we're implementing risk tools or activities in our businesses, we want to make sure that we don't limit ourselves to just one or two tools, as an example. Okay, you need to be aware of what the culture of the organization is, the needs of the organization, and by needs of the organization, we could boil it down to the needs of the particular group or area that you're working with that needs to start doing or needs to implement some sort of a risk-based thinking or risk management. We cannot just say, okay, this is the one tool, I'm going to throw one out there. I have an FMEA. I'm going to use FMEA for everything in my organization. Well, that's not going to necessarily help your organization. And believe me, an FMEA is a really good tool and it can be used for multiple things, but it might not be the right tool for a particular area in your business. So in order for us to drive that consistency that we want on our goods and services, we need to understand that we might have pockets within the organization where not the same tool can be used, and we need to be flexible in order to be successful. The ultimate goal here is to allow us to get to that level of consistency that we want with our products and services. So it can change, our approach can change from process to process. So that's something that we want to make sure that we are aware in our implementation of this. In achieving that consistency of services and goods that we might provide, we're certainly going to drive that customer satisfaction to a higher degree, as well as I mentioned, the confidence that the customer might have on you. And by doing so, we're going to be reducing or eliminating undesirable outcomes, undesirable issues. And as we do this, we want to make sure that we are doing measurements. And by measurements is we having tangible results to prove to ourselves that whatever action we're taking, it's indeed effective. Okay, so we want to have, whether it's data or whether it's results, it has to be tangible. And that's it. When I say measurements here, it doesn't mean you need to have a KPI or a key process indicator or a metric, but you need to have a tangible outcome to show that what I did has been effective, whatever the case might be. So that can change depending on the action that you took in order to address the risk or the opportunity. So tip number one, all this leads to basically one of the things that we want to do, and a good place for you as a participant on today's webinar. And rather than to think of what tool can I implement, one thing that I will recommend you to do when you get back to work and start thinking about risk is this: strive to be a low risk supplier. What's that mean? It's going to mean something different to each one of you. It's going to mean that your starting point for each one of you is going to be a little bit different. What it means to you also means that, as I mentioned, the starting point is going to be different. It's going to be, what does that mean to my customer or my customers? What does my customer very concerned about? And how can I lower that risk so that they're not so concerned about that particular issue or issues? So tip number one, or takeaway number one, if you want, strive to be a low risk supplier. So what does a low risk supplier take into consideration? When in the risk management, they're looking for ways to make sure that they're making better decisions. And this ties back into what I mentioned a few minutes ago. It's do not lock yourselves into one tool. So we want to make sure that we are facilitating by using whatever resources available there are to us as quality facilitators or quality practitioners. Are we providing the right tools so that our business or a particular group or process are using the right tools in order to get to be making better decisions? The next thing is that we understand that when we're doing this, it is to protect our customer or the end user or the consumer, however you guys call it at your business. Okay, so we are very Some companies call this very customer-centric, end-user-centric, patient-centric. Whatever we do, we are thinking about what will be, if we do this, what's going to be the result, or how is our customer, how is the end user, how is the patient going to be affected. By being a low-risk supplier, the other thing that you're doing as a added benefit is you might be adding a higher degree of confidence, or providing a higher degree of confidence to other third parties, mostly regulators. Okay, when regulators see that you have a good system in place, they will understand and they will be able to work with you in the case there's any issues that present themselves, or as their potential issues become new, as things change over time, they understand that you have the right processes in order to handle and mitigate issues down the line. When we're dealing with risk, there are 4 types of actions that you can normally take. The first action is completely avoid it. You say, I'm not going to do this. We're going to walk away from this. We're not going to bring this into our business and be done with it. And that happens in some instances where, management takes a look at an opportunity and they say, we're not going to be doing this at all. So you completely avoid the risk and you'll be done. And what most companies end up doing in many instances, or the bulk of the risk management or risk-based thinking centers around the next action, which is basically reducing or mitigating the risk. Okay, and that's basically when you take a look at that severity and the likelihood of a potential risk, and you determine, okay, what can I do to make sure that this is less likely to happen? A third action includes something that we call transfer or sharing the risk. That's where insurance comes into play. And that's exactly what you're doing when you're dealing with insurance companies. You are transferring the risk to the insurance company, or you are sharing the risk with them. And the last thing that you could do with the risk is accept the risk. And so each company, each organization, each process might have a different, what I call risk tolerance level, where they might be able to say, no, we have everything that we need. We have mitigated the risk sufficiently enough that we are going to move forward as is because we understand what the risk is. We accept it. So let's move forward with it. Now, sometimes it could be something that it's a risk that you cannot mitigate, and you take the proper. Sometimes it's something that is risky, but you say, you know what, we could live with this risk because even though it could be very severe, the likelihood of it happening is very low. I'm willing to live with this risk and do not take any actions whatsoever and accept the risk from the get-go as is from when you found it or when you identify it. That is quite possible. Again, that changes from business to business. That changes sometimes within the business from an organization to an organization, where you might have different objectives and whatnot, or priorities sometimes can affect how is it that you are looking at risk. So when we're visualizing risk, the traditional view when we are looking at risk has been on this low, medium, or high risk, and it's usually associated with a matrix where we have the likelihood or the severity. In here I have a consequence, same idea. And in this particular case, we have here is not only low, medium, or high, but it's low, moderate, high, or extreme, or some variance of that. That's how we traditionally look or think about risk. When risk-based thinking came along, they said, well, you could think about risk about that way, but if you're going to be adding the opportunity aspect to it, there are certain instances where you could be looking at risk from a different perspective, maybe on a more linear way, on a grade system, if you will, where maybe a 0 is neutral, where 3 is you took action and it was a breaking improvement, maybe makes you a leader in the industry, or if you took the wrong action and things went wrong, maybe it's a setback to the business. Now, a good example of this I have is one particular company that I worked with many years ago. They used to make connectors for the semiconductor industry. Think about just simple connectors. One of the things that they had in their system was to bring in a new product every year. So they were very good at developing, identifying needs from customers, and developing new products every year. And they had become so efficient at it that basically every year they will go in and develop that new product, and that new product will show that it will grow in terms of revenue in years 2, 3, 4, and 5. When I ask the management team in that organization, say, hey, why are you guys not a little more aggressive in bringing in new products into the market? They told me, well, Pierre, we have been able to focus things down in such a manner that we're pretty good, and there was proof, at picking up the winners. That's how they put it. And the reason why they did that was because when they went in, every year they budgeted for a new product development, and the new product development had close to $1 million worth of investment on their side in developing, not only doing all the design and development work, but also the development of any new tooling that was required on their side, and trials that needed to be done with their suppliers up and down their supply chain. So they came to me and said, well, listen, if we fail, then it's $1 million that roughly in our budget that has been allocated for this. So if we fail, we are at 0. Nothing happens because we have a very healthy revenue streams. Our product portfolio is very healthy. So if we fail in 1 year, that's okay with us. We're willing to take that risk. However, if we win, it could be a 1 or 2 or 3, depending on the nature of the market at the time. So if they win, they knew they were going to be taking a positive strides. So they said, well, if we do 2 or 3, that's too big of a risk for a small company of our size. So we're not willing to take that. So here's another example that in a way they did this automatically. They already knew, okay, I'm willing to take this type of a risk, knowing that it's part of what we do. And if we miss it, that's okay. We already kind of had the budget and built that for it. So there's no negative outcomes. It's just part of doing business. But if we win, certainly the positive side of it was that some revenue will be generated over time. So for them, that approach was almost a win or no loss type of situation. Now, when we're looking at risk-based thinking, it is very simple. And you could almost implement it thinking in 2 simple questions, as we have here in the slide. What can go wrong? Or what can we do better? Just as simple as that. That's what risk-based thinking is all about. One is talking about the risk, and the other one is talking about what opportunities may you have, whether it's in the overall business, whether it's in a process, or even in an activity. Pitfall number one. So we want to make sure that when you're implementing risk-based thinking, or you're implementing risk management, however you want to call it, do not limit yourselves to just one tool. You need to be cognizant of who your organization is, or who are the folks involved in a particular process where you need to be deploying risk management, and understand that one size does not fit all. So as a reminder here, I'm going to leave a couple quotes. None of these are quality practitioners, but a couple quotes just to remind you about this and kind of drive this point of not limiting yourself to one tool. Is if you have to pick the right tool for the point that you're trying to make, and there's no one solution. So there's multiple ways for you to get to have an effective risk management process or system in place. Okay, so that's the ultimate goal for all of us in terms of when we're practicing quality, is we want to make sure that things get done and that they're effective. That's the ultimate goal. Or, as I mentioned to you, the first takeaway, we want to be a low risk supplier. That's the ultimate goal. It's not how well I'm implementing an FMEA. I'm picking on a poor FMEA here as part of my presentation. But the ultimate goal is being a low risk supplier. So I need to be flexible and understand my organization so that you're able to get there. Whilst this other phrase says it, we want to make sure that you are focused on that, driving the risk system in place. Quick poll, just to see, before we discuss some of the tools that are out there. How many risk tools are you aware that are being used at work or at your business? Possible answer is one, risk, what is that? B, just one tool. C, two tools. D, three or more tools. Or E, too many tools. Jan, trusting that you are...
Yeah, the poll is running.
We'll give you a few more seconds, and then if you could start sharing some of the results, that'd be great.
So the results are still coming in. So 1% said risk. What is that?
That's good.
So, now it's 2%. So it's really good that you're here right now and with us today. Then one tool, 23%, two tools, 23%, three tools, 33%, and 80% said too many tools.
Too many tools. Okay.
Yeah. And now I will close the poll. And people can see also the results.
Well, thank you for that. So it is essential for you to have good tools, but it's also essential that the tools should be used in the right way. Okay, so keep that in mind. So what tools are out there? And again, I'm going to give you just a few tools that are well known here. And certainly, if you want to ask a little bit more about them in the Q&A session, we could take some time. But the idea is just to give you an idea of tools that are available, not so much spend time discussing each particular tool. As a matter of fact, probably each particular tool can take us a whole webinar each to just discuss how to implement it and the benefits and the cons, pros and cons of each particular tool. But here's a list of a few tools that are available for you to use. The first one that I have here is something that is called a SWOT analysis. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I find this tool in particular to be very useful, especially when we're trying to address risk at a very high level perspective. So when I'm looking at a company that is thinking or has developed a strategic vision and they have long-term goals and short-term goals, I can use this tool to say, okay, here are the goals, here's where we're going as a business. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What opportunities do we have? What are the threats that will help us get there or prevent us getting there based on this vision that we have for the business? And the SWOT analysis plays nicely in that type of environment or type of situation. Another tool, the traditional type of risk matrix. In here, I gave you in the prior slide, it had four grades of severity. In this one, you could see that we go from a very dark green to a light green to a yellow to an orange to a red. So we have 5 grades of risk levels that can be happen from something that is incidental, very unlikely, to something that is frequent and catastrophic. So depending on the organization, depending on the business that you might have, you might develop risk matrices that can be like this, where you might have where the different grades of levels might be needed. So like here we have 5. I mentioned low, medium, or high. That could be 3 grades that you're looking at. So it depends on the business. And this one, we're trying to look at risk from trying to locate the risk in terms of severity itself. I have mentioned the failure mode and effects and analysis quite a few times. The FMEA is a very good tool when put to use. You do need to have a team of experts, not experts on FMEA, but a team of experts on the process involved or the product involved in this. That's key in doing an FMEA. You need to put the time in front to make sure you understand the processes and have the right data to carry out the analysis that you need to carry out, that you get creative in understanding the failure effects and causes. You need to assess or do the ranking. And many of you, I know, I saw comments before the webinar. This is where the RPN or the ranking comes into place. And in an FMEA, we're looking at not only at risk and severity. That's part of the formula. That's 2/3 of the formula. But in FMEA, we're looking at risk, severity, and detection. How likely are you to detect the problem in your process or in your product? And then the last part of the FMEA is putting together risk mitigation actions where you as a business feel that it's necessary to take actions to address those risky items. Now, I will say this is not necessarily a high RPN level that might need to be addressed, but there are some other components in the FMEA where you could say, hey, I need to do improvement in this particular activity. A good example of that is where you have a high value in the detection, where you could say, hey, I can improve on my detection process and further drive the RPM value down. Okay, so that's another example. Other examples of readily available tools include, of course, financial analysis risk tools are out there and available to you. You could self-develop tools if you want. That's perfectly all right to do. Many years ago, when I was a quality manager, we used the matrix idea, but we developed our tool to implement changes. And what we did for the tool risk assessment, we were looking at how big of a change it was, so how severe of a change it was, and what was the impact to the business, and that took in consideration our customers. So we looked at ease of implementation versus impact of the implementation, and but that was a self-developed tool that we did at that time. There's also other financial performance or supplier information out there that you could use as risk management tools. Ease of implementation of changes, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. You can also use metrics to help you manage risk. Okay, especially leading indicators are very good into helping you address key aspects of the business. So if you're looking, as an example, at on-time delivery, on-time delivery is something that we call a lagging indicator. A leading indicator to on-time delivery will be schedule adherence, as an example. If you're looking at making sure that you take care of complaints on a timely manner, a leading indicator can be how many complaints have I assigned per engineer or per technician, whoever is responsible for handling complaints. Okay, so if one of your key metrics is to generate new return on investment or new revenue, you could be looking, okay, at how many new product introductions am I generating over time. So you could use your leading indicators to address whether you're meeting the ultimate objectives, which usually are what we call lagging indicators. Now, there are other tools out there. I'm just going to give you a quick list. I don't have it in the presentation, but just so to mention a few, there's fault tree analysis that can be used, the hazard operability and analysis, or HACCP, hazard analysis and critical control points, preliminary hazard analysis. There's multiple tools out there that you could use in order to assess and determine risk. Sometimes, for those of you that maybe have too many tools, sometimes our customers kind of impose or suggest, or as I like to say, they don't impose, but they strongly suggest what kind of tools we want to use, and we fall in that trap. And we are sometimes especially we have multiple customers and they all have strong suggestions. We end up having multiple tools. Again, just to give a few examples of tools here. One key thing to remember here, and here you could take this as maybe as your second takeaway of this presentation, is that risk management is indeed top management responsibility. It's not the quality department, it's not the financials department's responsibility, but when it comes to if you want to be serious about risk management or risk-based thinking, it is top management responsibility. Okay, when we look at the different ISOs, it's really in the standards. It's in there. It's under top management responsibility. They do say, but away from the standards, if there were no ISOs in the world, but if we wanted to, be an effective organization, we wanted to make sure that we're managing risk correctly, that responsibility is still there. It is top management responsibility to drive this. So they need to be involved in driving the awareness that this needs to happen. All right. So if we want to, and again, I go back to the first takeaway. If we want to be a low risk supplier, then I need to make sure that my key players, my key processes, people that are involved in those are aware that this is something that is of importance for us to do, and therefore I need to drive that awareness that we need to be engaged when it's time to identify, to sit down and discuss potential risk or opportunities so that we could improve ourselves as a business. Next thing is that certainly they need to provide the resources. When I say we need to provide the resources, they need to provide not only just the people, but also make sure that the right people are involved in this particular process, that they are allotted the time, but also the resources that if you come up and you determine that this is something that you need to take action with and that's of importance, they provide the resources to kind of help you either eliminate or mitigate the necessary risk. When we're looking at risk, here's a basic process that can be followed, and this is our interpretation. This is basically taken out of a ICH Q9. This is a flowchart that is in there, or it's a variance of that flowchart, I should say, but this is basically inspired on ICH Q9. And when we're looking at your risk management process, we're normally looking at starting the process. What could go wrong, or what could be beneficial in this case when we're talking about risk-based thinking, and then you go into the risk assessment activity, and that's basically identifying what the risks are, then carrying out an analysis and an evaluation. That will take us basically to the next step, which is risk control, which is where we determine, okay, these are the areas that we need to work on, and this is risk, basically the risk mitigation or the reduction. We continue working on that, and then we get to a certain level, and then we say, okay, there's nothing more that we can do with this, and that's where you head to the risk acceptance part of the process. Now, there might be certain events, as I mentioned, though, where you say there's nothing that we could do from the get-go, and then you jump straight into the risk acceptance. That is fine. All along, by the way, we're using different tools. Whether it's an FMEA, Fishbone is another tool for as an example, and we are communicating. That is very important on this. As you start identifying or you identify risk mitigation, it cannot just sit in a document. Right? It needs to be communicated to the right people so that they are very aware, hey, this is an issue, or here's a potential issue that we need to work on. This is what we're going to be working on. This is how we plan to bring it down. Please be aware. As we move through this process, then we're going to be basically looking at the output of our work, and this is where we start measuring our effectiveness. I mentioned early on, in order for this to be effective, you need to have tangible results to say, hey, this is working, this is acceptable to us. So that's the next to last step there. And the last step in this process is your risk review, which is reviewing events, occurrences that happen on a day-to-day basis on the business or on a monthly basis. Furthermore, the business changes over time, right? That's something that happens. Our environment changes, our regulatory climate changes. We bring in new products, or there's new technology that becomes available to the business. All these are valid review events that you should take into account and kind of restart the the process again. So it is a process. Okay, it's not something that you do once and you say, okay, I'm done. It is something that you're constantly looking, because as the business evolve, your evaluation of things need to stay up with that, or as things happen in the business, we need to make sure that we're looking at things accordingly. Now, don't expect as you're going through this risk assessment initially that you're going to get 100% of all the risk or all the opportunities that are available to you. That's why we're doing these risk reviews, because as things occur, new things that were maybe there from the beginning kind of get triggered. So now you cover them. So that's an ever-evolving process, and it's something that you consistently can be looking at to make sure that you're identifying opportunities or additional risks where that you might be able to take action and make yourself that low risk supplier that you want to be. Pitfall number 2, and many of you might be going like, I understand this one. Risk management is not one person's or one department's responsibility. I might be preaching here to the choir, but we want to make sure that indeed, as I mentioned, this is top management responsibility. It's not the qualities department responsibility or the risk management responsibility. No man is an island, right? So how do we make sure as quality practitioners or people responsible for the execution of risk management in our business gets carried out and gets performed effectively, and not in what I call a vacuum or in a funnel where one person is just doing, or one department is just doing and saying, okay, we took care of it, we're done. Well, that's not going to be effective. So what do we need to do in order to open this up? So we want to make sure that as we're doing this, we have the people with the right level of knowledge involved, the what and how, the when and the why, for the different key processes or the products that you might be looking at. Knowledge is key in this particular case, right? And in all instances, as a matter of fact, so that's gonna, having access to the right level of knowledge is gonna also facilitate our decision-making process, which I mentioned, that's key in this overall process, right? We want to be making good decisions. Well, in order for us to make good decisions, we need to have access to the knowledge. So the right people need to be involved in order to be effective. And by right people, it doesn't mean necessarily just managers or supervisors. It could be very experienced people that, again, have the knowledge to be involved and discuss and have history with the industry. Now, sometimes it's also good to have people that ask the right questions. So in many instances, having people with little experience or little exposure to the product might be good, in the sense that as long as they know to ask the right questions. That's also important to keep in mind as you build your teams. And then as we manage this knowledge, we want to make sure that we understand how we're going to be doing the analysis. So we want to make sure that people understand how to use the different tools that we're going to be implementing. And then also, how are we going to make this knowledge available in order to, as I mentioned in the process a few slides ago, we need to communicate, right? So we need to make sure that we are leveraging technology, especially nowadays, to communicate and have access to the information as needed, when needed, and where needed. Very important. And the last tip or pitfall, and I combine this one all into one, is that there is no such thing as a simple or small change. So many times we have issues, risks occur or become more prevalent when we introduce a change. Now, yes, indeed, there could be simple and small changes, but what I mean by this is that many times we leave our guard down when we think, oh, this is simple, don't worry about it, and then we do it, and then sure enough, a few days after something gets implemented, all of a sudden we get starting to have issues. So we want to make sure that we always pay attention to changes with the right level of due diligence that is needed in order to make sure that we are not creating any issues down the line, that we are addressing any potential risks as we bring new or modify items into your process or into your product. And I've been to companies where they say, "Oh, that's not a change; it's just a modification." It's all the same from a risk perspective. It is a change. Okay, so we want to make sure that we don't leave, we don't put our guards down, and we are, well aware of what we're doing and understand what we're doing as we are implementing this any type of change. Okay, and not only to the product, but not only to the key processes, but sometimes to the supporting activities as well can bring issues into your key processes. So when we're doing this, we want to make sure that you understand the scope of the change and the different interactions. Where is the change going? Who and what is going to be affected by the change? And just as important, we want to make sure we understand that what is the implications to our customers. And by customers, it could be internal, and that kind of goes a little bit hand in hand with the interactions that I just mentioned into the business. And of course, our external customers, whether it's your immediate customer, or in some instances, it might not be the implication might not come to your immediate customer. It can be the end user as well. So we want to make sure that we understand that as we are making changes. So some conclusions on this as we drive this towards the end. Make sure you get people engaged. One of the key drivers of making sure that you get people engaged is top management needs to drive this, right? And as I mentioned, this is a top management tool. It's not a quality department tool or not a risk management, risk aversion group's responsibility. It's top management responsibility. And as such, we want to make sure that top management is promoting these activities. They are encouraging participation at all the appropriate levels of the organization. So that's one way to drive that engagement that we want to maintain. The other thing is we want to make sure that you have the right communications, the right communications tools, that you have the right way to spread the information as needed, and also to, in some instances, I call it communications loop. If you're looking for feedback, that the right processes are set. And by that, I also mean is sometimes if you're asking for feedback, you want to make sure that you're providing counter feedback, saying, okay, yes, we're going to do that, or no, we're not going to do this at this time. And don't leave the communication incomplete. So we want to make sure we have full communication loops as we do this. We certainly want to make sure that we're using the right tools for your organization or for the process. And last but not least, we want to make sure that you are able to prove not only to yourself, but to top management and to the folks that are involved, that these processes does indeed bring value to the business, does indeed bring value to the process. So as you're showing, you call it, some wins that you have or some positive outcomes where you were able to avert an issue, or where you were able to, improve a situation because you took an opportunity and took action. You want to have those ready to show, hey, this is what we could done. So here's the importance of being involved in this, and that's one way to also kind of ensure and drive that engagement that you might need at your business. But overall, an effective risk management process takes care of multiple things and has multiple things that you could look at. So you could take this slide that will become available to you later on, and you could kind of look at it as almost as a checklist, if you will, and you could ask yourself, is my process creating or protecting value? Is my process based on information, and do people have access to that information? And then, is it accurate? Or is this something that we need to work on? Is it part of what we do? Is it tailored to the business, or is it tailored to the process? Or is my risk management process tailored to this particular group's activities? Or am I trying to force fit the way everybody else does it, right? It's part of how we make decisions. In doing this, do we understand the different human factors that might be involved? And in some instances, some of you might have we have people from different parts of the world, so they join us. Some of you might be in organizations that have locations in different parts of the world, or might be dealing with suppliers that are in different parts of the world. We need to understand that there's cultural factors sometimes when those folks are making decisions or are involved in particular processes and work in order to get to make certain level of decisions, or sensitivity to risk levels. Are we addressing uncertainty? Are we looking at opportunities as well as not only just risk? Is it transparent and inclusive? So are we including all, is it being done in one group, or am I bringing as many people as possible together? Or is it being spread out through the organization? Being transparent, the communication aspect, again, is very, very important. Is it systematic? Do I have a good system? Have I structured correctly? It's timely. We do it on the right times. We know when to do it. We know when to pull the trigger and say, it's time for us to do a review again. That will also imply that you have a good system in place and that's properly structured. Is it dynamic? Am I always looking at, how can I make this better? Does it adapt to change? If new tools come up or technology gets introduced, am I bringing it in to make my system more dynamic and adapted to change, or adapted to the changes to the organization as well? And last but not least, is it part of the how we do and how we implement, or how we bring about looking at continuous improvement in our organization? With that, I'm going to open up the floor to any questions. I'll be more than happy to take those questions at this time. Thank you for your participation this afternoon or morning, wherever you are part of the world you are.
This was fantastic, Pierre. So thank you so much. We have plenty of questions. I'm not sure if we will be able to get through all of them, but you will have access to this presentation with Pierre's information later on. So you can absolutely reach out to him if you want to, if your question is not answered. So we'll just start from the most recent. Pierre, are there any standards? Are there any standard to risk ranking? Because if two different teams are to rank a particular risk, the probable number given will be different.
That is true. And I'm going to take FMEA as an example. Well, FMEA as an example does have some definitions of what ought to be the severity levels, the likelihood levels, and the detection levels. So that in itself is standardized. However, unfortunately, when we are doing these rankings, you have the human factors involved. So that doesn't preclude me from, if I go to one organization and they look at that same process, let's say that it's a copy exact process in two organizations, even two organizations, they might come up with one RPM level that is different from the other. Okay, that's unfortunately that's the human factor in this. So FMEA has done a really good job in providing some guidance into helping you do that as an example. But unfortunately the results can be different. Now, with that said, one way to kind of counter a little bit that situation, that's the importance of having a good team involved where differences of opinion can be calibrated and the discussion can be centered into getting to the most appropriate answer or ranking, if you will, for each organization.
Great. The next question is how to handle a departure from approved risk assessment during the effectiveness study. Should we assess it again, or is an investigation required for this?
It's up to each organization. Sometimes the effectiveness can be done in a number of different ways. Sometimes yes, you might have to investigate, meaning going back to the activity and taking a look at it and making sure yes, things have indeed been mitigated. We do that as part of your corrective action process, if you will. That's in a way, and that's part of that. But sometimes it can be done also by just looking. Sometimes if you took a specific action where you're trying to reduce a certain type of occurrence, you could be just looking at your data to say, "Hey, this is working." So it's all dependent, and you have to always look at what's the objective of what I'm trying to achieve, and that should lead you to how to determine how to carry out that effectiveness check.
Okay. The next question is how to avoid or decrease subjectivity when doing a risk assessment.
We have a lot of patience. As I mentioned, there is the human factor. So I kind of go back to my prior answer. Doing some level of calibration. Sometimes having too many grades lends itself to make things more subjective. So sometimes you want to have grades that are very marked. So sometimes the high, medium, and low comes in more handy because it's either high, low, or medium. It's not as opposed to high, medium, low, and low. You're adding subjectivity into that, right? So you have to keep that in mind when you're setting your criteria. But certainly having a good definitions of what falls into that, and sometimes it's impossible to get 100% of that definition correct because there's always something that we don't see. But having good definitions on those criteria can help kind of reduce that subjectivity.
Great. So this goes to a tools question. So some of those tools that are used in the root cause, are also used. Some of those tools are also used in root cause analysis, right? Should also the operation units be trained on them and not just the top management?
Absolutely. So once top management or as a group, you determine what's the best tool to use, then then you could use the deployment of those tools. So you have to figure out what works for you. For some businesses, again, FMEAs, it's a great tool, and it works for them, and they have the resources to implement. So as I mentioned, not only just FMEAs, but any risk tool, it's not only getting it done the first time, but it's how we're going to be updating it as an ongoing process.
Great. The next question, you did touch upon it, but I think it's really valuable to remind everyone of this. The question is, kindly help me out to understand, do all risks need to be reviewed, and what time frame?
The time frame is up to you. There's no such thing as reviewing all risks. That's almost visually or virtually impossible, right? So as long as you could show that, what is important here is that you could show that your process is robust enough and effective enough to identify risks, and that you are addressing them to meet the needs of your customers as well as your business. That usually is the right answer.
And could you define the difference between what a risk analysis is and a risk evaluation?
Risk analysis is basically when you're, let's put it this way, you're creating a catalog of all the different risks, activities might be, and the evaluation is the ranking. That's the best way to put it.
A question on top of that is, could you explain what a risk term is?
A risk term?
Yes. If that's just a quick question. If hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. The term risk, as we defined early on, is simple as probability times severity. Or how bad and how likely a bad event can occur.
Okay. The next question is, are there any specific use categories for each one of the different tools, or any preference field?
No, not really. It's up to each organization to deploy the right tool on the right level. As an example, again, going back to the FMEA, that's one that we're very familiar with. We use FMEAs in a business to not only address product, but we used it as to, obviously, for design of product. But we went further away and we got creative with the FMEAs and used it for when we were bringing in a new raw material to help us understand how ready we were to bring in a new raw material from a quality perspective. We use FMEAs as part of our maintenance program when we're reviewing our equipment maintenance and understanding all the potential failures a piece of equipment had, and to help us set priorities on what we needed to have in place in order to ensure our equipment was top shape and running effectively.
Great. I have a scenario for you. So this says, it's a little bit of a long one. So
okay.
Initial process risk assessment report is prepared and approved. Later, in the case of any process deviations, separately risks are assessed and documented as part of the deviation report. We never go back to assess or update the initial risk assessment. Could you comment on such a scenario?
I'll make this comment. In the ideal world, that deviation, we are bringing it back to the risk assessment sooner or later. Now, you might have different criteria to say when I need to trigger this or when I need to feed this deviation back into the loop. But as I mentioned, there should be criteria in your process as to what events might trigger a review or call it an update on my whole system.
Thank you. When using more than one tool, does that not contradict the consistency?
No. The consistency, what we're looking here, the consistency you're looking for is addressing risk. So the tool is just a tool. It's just your means to make sure that you're addressing tools or risks. I'm sorry, in an effective manner, according to whatever your process might be, or whatever activity you're looking, or whatever area you might be in.
Okay.
So the tool is just a means to get to looking at your risk and opportunities.
Perfect. This next question is very similar along the lines with the tools. So it says, the question is, some models have detectability as a separate measure when trying to quantify risk. So far, quantify risk. Do you build detectability into the measure of probability with more detectable hazards less probable of occurring? I can reread that if you need me to.
Yeah, read again for me.
Sure. Some models have detectability as a separate measure when trying to quantify risk. Do you build detectability into the measure of probability with more detectable hazards that are less probable of occurring?
This is answer in the typical quality fashion. It depends.
I was waiting for one of those.
So that detection level, it's very clearly defined in the FMEA, as I mentioned, right? That's a category. It's something that can be used to rank and help you assess the risk. Whether you use that detectability concept into bringing into probability, I think you could say and you could attribute that yes, it's there, but it's innate to the person, right? So or to their experience. So it's kind of built into our own personal experience, and that's why you want this to be done again, not by one group or one person, because their experience, their exposure is limited. When you bring this into a more comprehensive group and multidisciplinary approach, that's what you're bringing in there. When you don't have the detection category defined, is their experience kind of is put into that probability, if you will. I hope that's clear.
If not, they can definitely email you for more details.
Absolutely.
So the next question is, can FMEA and 5Y be combined?
My answer to that is probably yes. If you're really trying to get to the, what is the potential cost, and really identify what that potential cost is, something that's not quite clear, that might be a tool that could help you get there. Now, it's not something that it needs to be included in the FMEA. It's going to be kind of like a side tool to kind of help you complete the FMEA.
Okay. The next question is, let's see, which is the best risk assessment tool to use for validation process?
It depends. It depends, and I really mean it. It depends. It'll be unreal for me to say this tool is the best. I don't know your process, right? So, and sometimes in order to get to the right tool, it is trial and error. So it really depends. For some companies, a full tree analysis is good. For other companies, the FMEA is great. For other companies, the HACCP works better than FMEA. So again, it changes from a company to company.
This answer is probably going to be identical to what you just said, but someone did ask what risk tool is good for pharmaceutical distribution of drugs.
Again, depends on it depends on the business. Yes.
Perfect. Let's see. I think we have time for one more question. Are there any standards to risk ranking? Because if two different teams are to rank a particular risk, the probable number given will be different.
Yeah, there's no such standards that I'm aware of. I know, for example, FMEA has those tables in there, but again, as I mentioned, I think that was the first or second question that we had today. That doesn't guarantee that even within the same business, you could have two teams looking at the same process, and they might come out with slightly different results.
Okay, and actually, there's one more question I think is worthy of answering. Will reactive risk give any issues with Kappa?
No, there's some need for reactive risk or where you accept risk. And as an example, in the automotive industry, there is an expectation of that. And, I call it a big risk, you're supposed to have contingency plans. And those contingency plans respond to, in case of there's fire or there's material shortages or labor shortages, you're supposed to have a plan to know how to react to that. So there is an acceptance that something like that can happen, but the expectation is that if it happens, you know what to do. By the same token, even when you're looking at control plans, if you implement control plans effectively in your process, the last box of that traditional control plans is called a reaction plan. So there's kind of acceptance to, okay, you have done everything that you need to do to kind of mitigate risk, but if it indeed does happen, how are you supposed to react to it? So yes.
Great. So I think that's all the time that we have for our question and answer portion of the presentation. So thank you so much, Pierre, for answering a good amount of questions in that amount of time. Again, his information will be available for any additional questions. So I'll pass it back to Jan.
Great, thank you, Ashley. Pierre, thank you very much for coming today, sharing this amazing knowledge. I already got per email so many amazing messages. Thank you very much. It was so constructive and so on and so on. So I will be also sharing the feedbacks with you later. So, and please, you got an email that asks you to leave a review about this session. Please leave a review so we know what we can do better, because our purpose is to give you the best knowledge, the best information, the best way we can. So thank you very much for joining us today. Please come back to more events. Please use the link at the top to join our Qualistory groups and Qualistory Telegram and WhatsApp groups to get the information directly so you don't miss such events. And also you can find Pierre's LinkedIn profile also there in the link, and also you can also follow Qualio, because I do believe that we will have some more amazing events to bring to you together. So saying that, I wish you all an amazing day, evening, morning, depending where you are, and see you at the next event. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.